not just like, how do I build like a truly interesting crypto project? A thing that I hear continuously in crypto is people being like, why would we want all friends? Like, we want money to come into crypto. We don't want money to go out. And it's like one of the things that I think we learned at Venmo is like, the easier we make it to get money out, the more people keep money in. And I think it just speaks to like, I think if you make things just like easy, like you're going to build trust with users.
This episode is brought to you by Access Protocol. You'll be hearing more from them later in the show. This episode is sponsored by MyPrize, which is the first multiplayer casino where you can watch, chat, and play together with your friends. Use the referral code Lightspeed when signing up to receive a 150% deposit bonus for up to $300. We'll hear more from MyPrize later in the episode. Howdy, and welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. I'm Jack Kubanek, hosting today, and really excited to have Ben Mills joining the pod. Ben and I have spoken once or twice in the past. He is a co-founder of Meso, which does on and off ramps if you use the Phantom Wallet, MarginFi, other crypto apps. You might have interacted with it. He also was at Solana Labs, Venmo, some other things in fintech. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, man. So we spoke in the past, and you told me about it was kind of the end of an interview, and I was just like, hey, what's interesting to you? And you pointed out this app called D-Plan. Mm-hmm. That's sort of like a micro payments subscription service that I ended up looking into, and I wrote about it in the Lightspeed newsletter, and is still one of the, I think, really interesting Solana projects that I've gotten to write about and cover. So I guess I wanted to start in a little bit of an unconventional way, sure, and just ask, what's interesting to you? What are you finding interesting in the crypto world today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that is, I'm like probably more of like an engineer at heart than anything. So like I just get excited to see people building stuff that is actually real. So I think clearly, everyone who's kind of paying attention to crypto understands that like we need more apps. We need to see more like real adoption, real things for people to do. But it has been pretty exciting to me over the course of this year to see like a lot of apps actually start launching. So like D-Plan's a great example. Code, another Solana project that's like a P2P app, very fascinating. Like, of course, like the big ones like Market. But I think more than anything, what I get excited about is it's like one of the things that I saw like last cycle is a lot of the apps made like huge sacrifices to kind of make it usable and accessible to people in like huge sacrifices in the realm of things like self-custody. And like, that's what led to like, CFI and all those blowups. So it's been awesome to see kind of infrastructure like wallet as a service, products like Turnkey, Privy, others actually start to get real adoption, because now we're seeing apps that have, the ease of use that you would see in Web 2, but not actually sacrificing things like self-custody, which is phenomenal. And in general, this is one, coming from the world of fintech, one of the things that I get most excited about in crypto is it is genuinely easier to build. Like, unless you're building a very, very simplistic like financial product like e-commerce, like it is way simpler to build in crypto. Like one of my friends, again in my Kudek, who's building Sling.money, it's like another P2P app. I
spoke to him yesterday.
Oh, you did? Okay, great. Yeah. But like him and his team have built like kind of a similar background to myself and my team, which is, a lot of us at Meso are ex PayPal and Braintree. At Sling, a lot of them are like X Square and Monzo. And he has said a few times to me, it's like the fact that these are all self-custodial wallets actually simplifies a lot for us. It allows us to like move faster and not have to worry about a lot of the things we have to worry about in Web 2. And I think that I'm hoping we're only going to see that more and more. It's like as this infrastructure improves, like hopefully that will lead to apps and that will bring more consumers in, but it's also going to bring in a new class of builder. It's going to bring in people that are just like, hey, I just want to build, a really bespoke kind of like consumer financial app that, if I were to build this with Stripe or kind of existing payments infrastructure, this would take me millions of dollars and months, if not years of effort. Now I can do this with, very little to no funding and get off the ground without having to go through all that pain. So I'm super excited about that. I think
let me break in there, because that's kind of an interesting take to me, because you're like saying that you're really happy to be seeing apps launch, and I feel like broadly the temperature in maybe just crypto broadly, certainly in Solana, is like we need more apps. There aren't enough apps outside of like Coinbase that have meaningful user bases. So that's sort of against the grain. And then also saying like a lot of the infrastructure has helped get us here. And I feel like infrastructure is sort of looked down upon a little bit, like, hey, we need to stop just building endless infrastructure and we actually need apps that have users. So I'm just like curious to hear you maybe expand a little bit on your optimism about apps and infrastructure, which seems like it's a little bit against the mood right now.
So I don't disagree with the kind of current sentiment on infrastructure. I think we're building infrastructure at Meso. And I think the hardest part with infra is it's very easy to build for like a niche that just doesn't exist. And I think what I think, the infrastructure I'm talking about, like the wallet infrastructure, I think they correctly all saw like there is going to be a need to kind of use wallets and use kind of self-custody in more flexible ways. And I think that was like right on the money. Now there's like probably a graveyard of other categories of infra that have like died or at some point probably will die because they like either like incorrectly identified a trend to try to solve for, or just were like, it was the wrong time. So I'm not saying that like an overabundance of infrastructure is a good thing, but I think the right infrastructure is really important. And I would say like, as someone who spent a lot of time building at kind of the intersection between kind of like average consumers and crypto, there is still like a lot of infrastructure needed. Like there's still a lot of really, really big problems. I mean, like we work with Helios and Mert to try to get our like Solana transfer flow to be really clean. And like that, like they are phenomenal and like the best team we've worked with and we love them. But it's like, that took a lot of time and effort. And like that to me only tells me is like they have a lot more to build. Like there's a lot of more that I think RPC providers are going to be doing and improving that are going to get it to the point where it can truly be turnkey, where you can just show up and just not think about it at all. On the app side, I think I do think while it's exciting, like that's why I kind of caveated what I said of like I come at things from more of an engineering perspective. Like I'm excited to even see apps go live, period. I do still think that I would like to see more experimentation. I think like a lot of the apps we're seeing are like trading focused apps. And like I and Meso in general we're just pragmatic. And it's like the way I look at it is like, I want to meet users where they are today and hopefully like lay out the groundwork to meet them where we want, like they're going to be over time. But the reality is like the main consumer use case of crypto today is trading and speculating. So I don't think it's wrong to go after that as a use case. But I think when a lot of people say we need to see more apps, what they're really saying is like, we need to like increase this market. Like we need to move beyond just pure speculation. We need to move into a whole other verticals, which I completely agree with. And I think that is a lot harder because it's like, then really what you're talking about there is you're not just building an app on crypto, which like is hard. It's like, it's gotten a lot easier, but it's still very hard. But you're also building into a new market, which is like even higher difficulty. So I think it will take time. I do think like, am I saying I think we're actually at the tipping point where like now we are going to start seeing massive adoption? 100% no. Like we're very far from that, like just to be clear. But it's just exciting to me to actually see like even in like 2021, 2022, it's like, I think if you were involved technically, you could sort of see the beginning of like, here's how you could build like a really clean and simple app and good UX without sacrificing all this stuff. but it was a ton of work. Like you would have to, you're more likely than not, like, building something like an MPC system on your own or building a smart contract wallet system on your own. It's just like only the most dedicated teams can do that. And like, frankly, they shouldn't have to. Like they should be focused on actually solving the problem the app's solving. And now we're at a point where like people can actually pick up stuff off the shelf and solve those problems and not have to think about them, which is a big change from where we were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes sense. I feel like sometimes the way that apps are talked about is a little bit of just like boredom on the, media side of things and also just kind of the crypto world broadly. And I do think there's this, you have to eat your veggies a little bit when you're building stuff in crypto. Like there are so many issues like regulation and like really smooth wallets and on-ramps like you are building and security. And there's a lot of like things that need to be solved before you can build a lot of apps that people are interested in building. And I think that, there can be this sort of like boredom inspired, hey, where are all the apps? I want something interesting to talk about or do. And right now meme coins kind of are the use case, especially on Solana. And like, that's where things are at. And I don't know if that's going to change super soon. Maybe like going into this idea a little bit of broader adoption. I think you're an interesting guest, Ben, because you come from Venmo. You were head of product there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how early in because I sort of remember when Venmo was coming out, like how early on were you working there?
So I joined in, I think 2017. So Venmo was like, I think the real like inflection point was probably 2014, 2015. I think when we were, so when I was part of Braintree, we acquired Venmo in 2012, and then we sold Braintree to PayPal in 2014. And I think at the time, I think the big focus was Braintree. Was like PayPal saw like, Stripe and Braintree and others basically just dominating the consumer or commerce payments. And they're like, we want a cut of that. We'll buy Braintree. And then this will be like our new dev platform for all of PayPal, which made sense. And like, I've actually been really happy to see some more like fintech oriented analysts starting to pick up on that. Like there's been a lot more buzz about Braintree in the last couple of years than I've seen in a long time. But I think Venmo is a little bit of an afterthought. And I think in spite of that, Venmo just hit kind of like this inflection point of growth in 2014, 15, where when I joined in 2017, we were, in the millions of daily active users, and we were doing generating a huge percentage of PayPal's global kind of net new users. So I would say I joined well after Venmo was like big and like well after we started growing at a very rapid pace. Like when I joined, a lot of the problem or like the big problem wasn't actually growth. It was how do we turn this into a profitable business?
Because Venmo, while like researching this podcast, like Venmo doesn't make money, right?
Well, Venmo makes money in a few ways, and I think all the P2P apps have done very well over the like high interest rate environment because they're obviously sitting on a huge amount of just cash that they can earn interest on. But the ways I think Venmo, the closest way Venmo makes money to kind of the core way people use Venmo is when people are taking money out of Venmo. So like P2P, the people who use P2P apps, it's like liquidity matters to them. Like they need money now. And so paying a small fee to get their money in their bank account instantly, rather than waiting a couple of days, turns out a lot of people are interested in doing that. So Venmo makes some Venmo, Cash App, a lot of the P2P apps make a huge amount of their revenue from these like instant withdrawal features. And then I think the other area that Venmo is now making like real material amounts of revenue in is in like the like value add services. So like this is using Venmo to buy something in an app or on a website, or buying something in real life using the Venmo card.
But like my understanding is it's net unprofitable, right? Because of all the banks they have to deal with without fees and things.
That's true. And I mean, this is where a crypto P2P app is kind of like, to me, like one of the more obvious things. And it's been funny to me that we haven't really seen one break through. But I think a lot of the criticism that I hear when people talk about P2P as a category is they're like, well, why should we do this? Like Venmo has solved it. But it's in many ways like Venmo, Cash App, Zelle. It's like they really haven't solved it. They just subsidize the problem. And so it's like, and you're seeing this kind of like creep back in. And it's like one of the reasons I exited fintech is that I was like, we're basically building on this house of cards, or not house of, like we're building on this, like we're putting lipstick on a pig, and like no matter what we do, it's like at some point we will become the pig, no matter how much lipstick there is. And like an example of this with Venmo is a huge use case in P2P is what we would call internally like the informal economy. So this is like, like someone selling their art on Twitter, or someone, who's like a, part-time hairdresser. It's awesome and it's great. The problem is that like PayPal treats that very differently than like what they call friends and family P2P. And they take a fee on non-friends and family P2P. And so at Venmo, when I was there, we were getting really excited about actually like this category of user. There's some really interesting ways you could monetize this that doesn't involve just forcing a fee on everyone. But unfortunately, because of just like the amount of money and the amount of users, we're seeing Venmo follow in the footsteps of PayPal, which is forcing like kind of any business related transaction to pay. I don't know what their fee is now. It's probably somewhere between 1% and 3%. And like, that sucks. And it especially sucks because it's like, for instance, like my barber, I always pay with Venmo. And like recently he was like, can you say like, thanks for lunch now in the note? Not this. They're not just like, for a while it was like opt in. So it's like, I was paying someone that looked like a business who would say like, hey, you can opt in to like buy or seller protection. And there's some advantages. And it's like, if you're, using Venmo to like buy something on Craigslist, that could make a ton of sense. But if I'm paying my barber, it's like, I already got my haircut. Like, what protection am I buying here? Like, I don't want to pay it, so I don't pay it. But now Venmo's actually just like, not even if I don't check that I want it, it's saying, hey, wait a second, like this transaction was commercial in nature. Therefore, like that barber now has to pay Venmo 3%. And it's like, that sucks. And like, sadly, I just think that we'll only see more of that over time because Venmo isn't profitable and they're going to need to find like every possible way to extract value.
So, not to jump the gun here, but the obvious follow-up to that is, crypto rails are cheaper to transact on maybe than traditional financial rails. But at the same time, as you well know, that you still have the issue of on and off ramping to fiat. So, maybe you don't have to deal with the cost of transferring money from here to there, but you still have to pay to like turn that money into fiat, which presumably if you're a merchant or just a person who needs to pay their bills is what you're going to want. So like speaking of Sling or a more crypto native peer-to-peer payment service, like does crypto solve that issue, or is it just going to be the case that you're going to have fees at some point?
I mean, I think that crypto does. So, I mean, it depends on the timeline. Like in it, like right now, I think you could argue that crypto is like marginally better, but it really will depend on, can a P2P app convince people to hold money in it? Like what we saw at Venmo is only about a third of our volume came from money that was already within Venmo. And so if that's the case, you're still going to have like a crypto P2P app is still going to have to think about, card interchange payments, bank fees for, more than half of their volume. So their unit economics are going to look pretty similar to what a Venmo looks like. So I think is problematic. But I think the advantage crypto has is the reason to hold money in crypto, I think is only going to increase over time. So I think it's like, where at Venmo, it was like that only Venmo could convince more people to hold money in Venmo. Like depending on the construction of a crypto P2P app, I think if it's done right, which I think is more like transparent, open to the user, it's like it's not just that app that has to convince the user to keep money in crypto. There's like lots of other things that could cause them to keep money in crypto, which I think is a pretty massive advantage. I think the other one that is like just like an unquestionable advantage is when you talk about cross-border. So it's like there is really no global P2P app because like no one has quite figured that out. Crypto actually could do that. And like that's one of the reasons I think Sling has been so successful is like focusing on cross-border and like kind of international P2P, I think is a place where it's like an unquestionable advantage to be on crypto.
Yeah, Sling is cool. I will probably write about it at some point. It just isn't live in the US, so I can't do a full demo with current Rails. Also lore drop, but I have a sister that lives in North Macedonia at the moment, and they're not on Sling, but we've tried to transact before for like plane flights, and it's a pain. So Sling, if you're watching, Mike, please add North Macedonia to the list. So before we move on from Venmo, I'm curious to ask, and sort of we got off topic because I'm interested in this stuff, but I'm just curious, going back to the very beginning of this podcast, we were talking a little bit about mainstream adoption, and you've gone to what is, maybe the success story, assuming it's not putting lipstick on a pig, as you said, but it's a big success story in peer-to-peer payments. Crypto fancies itself as a way to do peer-to-peer payments. Fragmentation is a big problem for Ethereum, but also for the subscription industry. We all know the pain of tracking which subscriptions you're paying for and the hassle of trying to cancel them. Well, Access Protocol is here to help with a new way to consume content via staking. It's built on Solana and gives you an easy solution to stay up to date on what's happening in the industry by giving you access to your favorite publishers like CoinGecko, CryptoSlate, and a whole list of independent creators. The ACS token, that's the Access token, is staked to gain access to all of that creator's content without the hassle of managing a subscription. If you want to give it a try, check out the link in the show notes to claim a free NFT that gives you access to a creator's content. MyPrize is the first multiplayer casino where you can watch, chat, and play together with your friends. With over 500 games ranging from slots to live table games to the latest online casino favorites, there's something for everyone. Crypto is at the core of MyPrize, so you can play it anytime, anywhere. Get your friends, hop into your favorite creator's room, and see why winning is better together. Use the referral code Lightspeed when signing up to receive a 150% deposit bonus up to $300. Thanks again to MyPrize for sponsoring today's episode. I just want to ask, like, what were the learnings at Venmo? Like, what was it that Venmo uniquely did that made it take off and become the phenomenon that it is for payments? And if
Yep.
I
think it's the things that I think Venmo did differently have like little to nothing to do with actual payments. I think the thing that I like really did not anticipate is like the biggest problem in P2P is finding the person you want to pay. Like figuring out like you can see this if you've ever tried to use Zelle, it's like Zelle makes this quite hard, and like they got a lot of flack early on and had a lot of like user pain early on because it was just really challenging, and because it's not really intuitive. It's like I think a lot of people, like when you're in the world of like payments and fintech, it's like it's so consuming that like it's easy to forget. It's like something as simple as like, well, actually like finding that other person you want to pay, it's like, well, why would that be a hard problem? And it's like, well, if you're at a bar and you're like, you're trying to pay someone for a drink and you have not really interacted with them before, how do you, like, what do you say? It's like, oh, give me your Zelle username, give me, it's just messy. And I think what Venmo did very smart early on is they're just like, it's all phone numbers. Like, just like pay a phone number, use the contact book. Like, don't try to solve this problem. Just use stuff that people are already using, which I think was really smart. And I think the other thing was the recognition that like, money is like emotional for people. Like it is like a taboo subject. Like a thing again that like I really surprised me is like when we would like do user research and user interviews, a recurring theme we heard over and over again is like Venmo really helped me like make it like less awkward to like get my friends to pay me back, because it's like saying like, hey, can you Venmo me for last night is like easier than saying, hey, can you pay me back for last night? And then the other thing that I think Venmo did in that arena is it like the asking users to like enter a note with their payment is like a really interesting choice, because it like flies in the face of like traditional like UX. Like you should remove friction at every step. And it's like Venmo, like we had a joke internally where there's like the period people, because Venmo, you have to enter a note. Like you cannot create the payment without entering a note. And so there's like a cohort of users that basically get around this by just putting a dot their note, and that's it. And we would like jokingly refer to them as like, there's this interesting group that just like rejects this completely. But we think that note was like, I think the whole idea of like a feed and seeing your friends' payments, that's a whole nother conversation. And I think there's, people who are for and against that on all over the place. But I think the idea of getting people to describe what the payment's for accidentally solved this taboo problem, because it forced both like the sender and the receiver to be like, what was this payment for? Like, what were we doing? It wasn't about $20. It was about us getting drinks. And like, I think that reframing really, really helped Venmo grow.
Oh, that's fascinating. I use Venmo in my day-to-day life. I haven't really thought about like I've definitely thought about the way that you can very precisely account out, hey, like how much, what was my share last night or whatever. But I hadn't thought about the note. Like that's because the social feed's a little dumb, I think. I'm not a big fan of it, but no offense. But the fact that you're acknowledging what the payment is for makes it maybe a stickier user experience or something. I don't know.
I also think one of the things that the founders of Venmo did a phenomenal job with is like they created, I think, pretty organically like this like brand and identity and like tone that was like fun and playful and engaging. And like I think that's another thing that like crypto should like. I think crypto actually is like naturally actually pretty good at. Like one of the things I like about crypto is it's like it's fun and silly, and like people play around with stuff and they try different things. But I actually think was really critical for Venmo, because like at the time Venmo was really scaling. It's like mobile, like phones like iPhones were just becoming popular. The idea like even the idea of like doing payments online was still like not quite a mainstream concept yet. And like doing payments on your phone was like yet another kind of step. And so like I think they needed that like layer of like fun and like playfulness to get people comfortable. And like this is the other, I think, part about crypto that is hard is it's like, you need to really get mainstream adoption. I think we need ways for people to like dip their toe in the water. And like with Venmo, like one of the things that we saw a lot of is like users start out and they'll just like pay someone $5, or they'll receive $5 and immediately cash it to their bank. And then they go dormant for a couple months. And then they make a few more transactions. And it's like we had like, a lot of people are probably familiar who've listened to this podcast with like the smile curve of Evernote, of like that was like this like breakthrough of like, oh, wow, we can actually get like cohorts of users that are retained at higher levels over time than lower levels. Our joke at Venmo is like we had the smirk curve, because what we would see is like not only would like users follow that same, they would start out and they would get more dormant over time, but then they would very quickly like surpass how active they were initially. And it's because it's like the more people they were using Venmo with, the more active they were, which also means they're bringing more users into Venmo, and it's this flywheel. And so it's like, how do we replicate that and create similar flywheels in crypto? I think should be the focus.
The other interesting one I remember you and I talked about previously was the fact that on Venmo, you enter your bank account once and then you never have to like fund a Venmo wallet. You just pay directly through Venmo. And this is one thing that I think crypto should be looking at is it's a little bit annoying to, I run out of Solana that I'm using to mine ore or whatever. Now I have to go find an on-ramp, put money into my Phantom wallet, and then take that wallet and spend it somewhere. It's just like an extra step that seems unnecessary. And I get that there's, infrastructural reasons that has to be that way. But I feel like if you do that step, it's so much easier.
I think just having users have to spend less time thinking is always better. And I think that there's a lot to talk about here, because I think there's a lot of reasons why it's been hard, if not impossible, to like achieve that UX in crypto so far. But I also think it's like it's just like a mindset difference. And like this is another thing, going back to your, the first point around like what's exciting, is like what's also really exciting to me is I think we're seeing a very new type of builder in crypto that is a lot more conscious of like how are we thinking about like the holistic user journey here, not just like how do I build like a truly interesting crypto project. Like a thing that I hear continuously in crypto is people being like, why would we want off ramps? Like, we want money to come into crypto. We don't want money to go out. And like one of the things that I think we learned at Venmo is like the easier we make it to get money out, the more people keep money in. And I think it just speaks to like, I think if you make things just like easy, like you're going to build trust with users. So I think it's like, yes, it's important to make it easy to have them get money in. It's also important, like more important than getting money in. It's like that idea of it shouldn't matter if a user chooses to hold money in crypto or hold money in a bank, but then still use crypto. Like that shouldn't matter to us. We should let them ease in however they want. And I think similarly with off ramps, it's like the easier you're going to make it to off ramps, the more users are going to trust you to keep money in. And like one of the wallets that I've been working with, I talked to them about this whole strategy 2 years ago. And I think last year they finally got off ramps live, and they were like, you were completely right. Like our on ramp volume and like average balance held went way up since we launched off ramps. So yeah, I think there's still in general, like I think there's a lot of like people that come from the world of finance and crypto. There's not a lot of people that come from the world of fintech and payments. And I still see a lot of like more kind of like payments UX 101 that hasn't made its way to crypto yet.
So speaking of that transition, then I think it'd be helpful if you dive a little bit into your story, because you're at Venmo, and then in like May 2022, I think you transitioned to Solana Labs, where you worked on Solana Pay, and then or no, maybe it was 2021. In 2022, you found Meso, I believe. So maybe just walk me through why you made that leap from Venmo to Solana, and then
there's actually
into founding Meso.
The timeline I think is not exactly right, but it doesn't matter too much.
Whoops.
I actually went. I left Venmo mostly because I was just kind of jaded in fintech. It's like the most interesting stuff that we wanted to build was like leaning more into consumer financial services. And it was like very clear that was going to mean like becoming more and more like a bank. And so it was just like this, I don't want to be doing this. Like, I don't want to just be like perpetuating this like infrastructure that's clearly not working. And I was just like, I think I'm done with fintech, did something totally different. And then after that, I was like, all right, well, what should I do now? I still have this like itch to do something like fintech, because fintech has this really fun blend of like highly technical, lots of like UX design challenges and the business side. So I love it. But it like still wasn't finding anything that was really like engaging me. And it took my co-founder being like, hey, you need to take a closer look at crypto. And that's where I was like, oh, like this is the first thing I've seen in a while that actually feels like a true like back-end innovation. Like most of fintech has been more of like the front end. It's like, how do we abstract this, all the details of this crazy broken like banking and payment system? And like crypto was the first thing I saw where I'm like, oh, this actually could like solve the root problem, which is really, really interesting. So yeah, I joined Solana Labs mostly because like I had a lot of conviction in like blockchains and crypto overall, but I wanted to spend a lot more time understanding like the ecosystem and like where I felt like I could really fit in the best. And joining an ecosystem team, I think, was like a great way to get that kind of lay of the land. Working on Solana Pay, I think that's where how do you like bootstrap a network or a marketplace is like a pretty like classic fintech problem. Like we've seen this kind of over and over again. And like, unless you have something really magical, usually the right approach is you just pick one side and you start there. And looking at crypto, I was like, the side to pick is consumer. It's like there's going to be a few niche merchants and businesses that want to experiment with this, but like if you're going to pick the merchant side of this, you have to believe they're going to bring the consumers, and I just didn't see that. And so if you pick consumer, then you start asking the question of like, well, how do we make it easier to just get users onboarded to crypto? Even if we don't quite know what they're going to do with it yet, it's like we have to make them sure they're there. And that led me into the world of on and off ramps. Like we were kind of exploring, like maybe we build like a wallet or like an open source like reference implementation of like what we think the ideal wallet would be. And as we were just working and looking at different APIs and systems to integrate for the payment side, we're like, none of this is even close. And as I thought more about it, I was like, actually, it makes sense because it's really what we're doing when you're on and off ramping in crypto. What you're doing in the world of payments is considered money transmission, which very, very few teams do money transmission because it's like it's not really a solved problem. Like if you want to build, like for instance, like a P2P app, like you want to go build like a Venmo or Cash App today, not using crypto. It's like you're spending probably millions of dollars and like years of time just getting started because like there's this is a whole nother thing we can go into, but like there's just a ton of like anti-money laundering regulation, consumer protection regulation, et cetera, that you have to adhere to. Like that, all of that I think goes away when you're on chain, but you still have to get people on chain. And so really I think what I realized is like every crypto app is either going to have to figure out how to do money transmission, which is just not possible. Like even within fintech and payments, very few teams go after that. And you're going to have to go do your own app on top of that. Like no one's going to do that. And so when we were thinking about how to solve it, one of the things that we got really excited about is like crypto has this really unique property, which is like a universally accepted like user system. Like everyone has like a wallet address and they can sign messages that lets them authorize things kind of across apps and across contexts. And so with money transmission, the one of the things that makes it hard is you have to have a very good understanding of who the user is, like legally and from other factors. Now we have the ability to be like, okay, we can do this once per user, and it doesn't matter what apps they're using because we have this wallet address. And so that's what kind of led us down the path to thinking, hey, actually, we have like our team has the background where we know how to do money transmission at scale. And we can now do it in a way that can kind of solve it for the whole ecosystem. And so that's really what led me down the path for Meso. And just just back up for a second, like what Meso really is like today, like you can think of us like an on and off ramp. It's like we're, like the MoonPays and the Stripes of the world like that. But really what we're trying to build behind the scenes is the first like fiat payment platform for crypto. And like what we want is like we want people to be able to build like fiat powered experiences, whether it's like topping up a wallet in real time to make a transaction or cashing out, et cetera, and have apps be able to build that themselves. Like, and they can be like theirs, not like they're kicking the user out to Meso. So that's a little bit more about what we're up to in our vision.
I think it's worthwhile to dig a little deeper on a piece of that, which is you mentioned, crypto to you was the first thing that didn't just have a really good front end, but it solved, or at all have a good front end, but that it was solving more core issues with things like money transmission. So can you just like maybe go a little deeper on what is the thing that crypto actually solves that like uniquely doesn't exist in the current way that money moves around the world?
It's instant. Is like the answer. Like literally, like so much. Like if all payments today were instant, we could probably like remove like 80% of the fintech that exists today, because it's like so much of it is working around the constraint that like the speed money actually moves is like very slow. It's like days at best. And so you're basically just trying to solve that problem. With crypto, it's like that problem just doesn't exist, which is, it's very hard to wrap your head around. And I find, so like one of the things that we are very good at is like working with like regulators and banks that don't really know anything about crypto and like helping them understand that it's like, yes, there's like a lot of nuance here, but in many ways, this is not that different from like traditional payments. But the idea that the like transactions are instant and final is like not, it's something that like non-crypto payments people like cannot really understand. Like it's very hard. And it's like it's what creates so much like other problems. Like it's the because like money movement isn't instant, you like risk becomes like this huge problem. Like you're like, even at Meso today, like we are like holding the bag, if you will, for a lot of our transactions, meaning like we think the user is good, or well, actually I should say it differently. If you're using something like ACH, which we're not live with yet, but we will be soon, we're giving the user, let's say they on ramp 100 USDC. We're going to give them that 100 USDC within seconds of them requesting that on ramp, but it's going to take us days to get the money from their bank. And like we might end up getting back the response from the bank, which is like they didn't have that money. Like it's not there. And then we're stuck holding the bag. But that forces us to like collect a lot more data about users, charge higher fees, and like do all these things that are very unnatural because we just can't be sure the money's going to be there. If you didn't have that, like you don't need to like have the intense data collection for risk purposes that you see today in fintech.
I remember having a conversation when one of the big like Citibank or something was doing a blockchain demo, and it's like I was basically saying like if blockchains are so good for like as this money ledger, like why are all banks not using it? And the response was, well, banks like don't want to absorb that risk. Basically, like they want there to be this buffer time between when the money is sent and when the money is settled, because then if there's some kind of fraudulent transaction, they're not absorbing that risk. Is that sort of the reason why I guess like banks and big institutions aren't using blockchains, to your understanding?
Well, I think that like banks and big institutions aren't using blockchains because there's just not regulatory clarity. And like if you're a bank, it's like you cannot, like you live and die by regulators. Like you're not like if you were going to take any amount of risk, you have to have it be very well understood, because it's not worth, like even if you experiment with blockchain, like that could cause problems for you across your whole business, not just with that one instance of it. So it makes sense to me why we're seeing very kind of like slow and cautious moves by most of TradFi, because it's just like they don't want to put their businesses at risk right now. But it's like we're clearly seeing that shift. I mean, this is why like Stripe's kind of doubling down on crypto, PayPal's like are incredibly bullish, because it's like these are companies that have a lot of those same constraints and are finding a way to get comfortable and work through it. But I do think there is like having instant like money transfers does create new problems. And like I think that like how do you deal with like accidental payments? How do you deal with unauthorized payments? Like those get a lot harder. And so that's where like it's I don't know what that is exactly going to look like. I think there's a huge percentage of payments that happen across the world that should just be raw blockchain transactions. But there's a whole other set of payments that are probably more like commerce-like payments when you're like buying something or buying some service, that like there may need to be a third party that's helping arbitrate that. I just think that like that role like today is like wrapped up in with a lot of other stuff. And so like, you're getting that through like Visa and others today. Like, do you need that same level of margin to deliver that service? Like, I don't think so. I think there's a way to make it a lot more efficient inside crypto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And I appreciate that explanation, because I was like thinking today, it feels like in this version of the crypto world or crypto Twitter or whatever, there's not as much of an impulse sometimes to like explain why the stuff everyone's building needs to exist. And I feel like when I first started covering crypto in 2022, you could like go viral on Twitter for your 30-part thread of all the different things that blockchain could be used for. And nobody seems very interested in that anymore. So I wanted to take that aside, because I think it's actually important to like continuously explain why crypto stuff needs to exist. And it's not just like, endless raise money for your infrastructure project and then make a token type of cycles. But there's like something real there that is a notable difference from the status quo.
Well, the other aspect that I think a lot about coming from fintech is it's one thing that I hear often when I'm like catching up and talking with like other fintech professionals is more often than not, like when you are like moving jobs in fintech, it's like you just are going to solve the same problems over again. It's like the industry just keeps solving the same problems all over again. And I think that's the other aspect of crypto that I get really excited about when it comes to fintech. It's like and this is another thing that I feel like I haven't seen as much recently, and I'd love to see kind of come back to, but like this idea of like true digital public goods or like hyperstructures, where it's like these are like protocols that like that there is no value with it directly. It's the value that we all get from using it collectively. Like there's a ton of places that would be incredibly valuable in payments, like fraud, risk. Like there's so much that, like if we could just all share open data, we could solve a lot of these problems more effectively and then like not have to just keep doing it over and over again.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask just a bit on the topic of Meso and what you're building there. This, to my understanding, is the first time you've been a founder.
Yes.
So I'm just curious to hear, like, compared to working in fintech, working in crypto, what's been uniquely challenging or what takes a lot of your time you didn't quite expect with being on the founder side of things now?
There like so much like that. I would say like that there isn't like one exact answer. It's just I've worked, I would say, most of my career on like small agile teams, but I've spent 5-6 years at like big companies, and I think you very quickly forget that when you're at a bigger company how much like infrastructure and support you have. So it's like, okay, we need like a legal opinion on something. And it's like, well, like you got to go figure that out. Like you got to go find a lawyer. You got to go get that done. Like there's just like nothing there. Like no one, like we have, a very, very limited set of resources. And so if we want to do anything, it's like, we all have to figure it out. So it's just all these like little odds and ends of things that like I never would be thinking I would be doing. Like my co-founder who's our CTO, it's like, he's had to go figure out and become an expert on like how 401ks work and like how to get that set up and like all those little details. And it's like, neither of us would have ever thought we would be spending time on that. So I think it's definitely that. It's just like how much all these like little odds and ends of like building and running a company like exist and like have to be done.
And then add on top of that, the, regulatory state of things.
We knew that was going to be hard coming in, but it was definitely way worse than we expected, for sure.
Like, why is it worse than you expected, out of curiosity?
I think it's mostly because like I think a lot of people in crypto like to think about like Operation Choke Point and like, the like trying to stop crypto. But there's like the other thing that has been happening in parallel to kind of crypto's growth is the growth of like banking as a service and these like more kind of like niche consumer financial products. And like in some ways like that over last year has also been crashing and burning. And so like there's a lot, if folks might not be paying attention to this, but there's this incredibly consequential case going on right now between Synapse and Evolve that is basically like in many ways feels like the FTX of fintech, where it's like this, the implications of what's going to happen after this, I think like we just can't figure out yet. Like there's a lot of that banking as a service infrastructure is what we rely on to build things like an on and off ramp. And so we're like, the way we look at it is like, we're getting hit from both sides. It's like crypto is under fire and banking as a service is under fire, which means like we went from when we were getting started, we're like, oh, we have like probably like 10 different options of like how we can get the right bank and payment provider and all that, to like there's like 3 or like and like in actuality there's like 2. So it's like that the amount of options we have was just incredibly limited, mostly just because there's just so many banks, and really a lot of this is the bank. So like not to go too deep into the world of like fintech, but like if you're working with a company like Stripe needs to find you a bank to actually do that. So like they're usually working with like a Wells, Fargo, or someone like that. And so if you go to like a Stripe and you're like, hey, I want to do a crypto on-ramp, they need to find a bank that's okay taking on that business. And like, that's why, like, even if a Stripe or a PayPal is very excited to work with crypto, it just doesn't matter if they don't have banking partners that are willing to support it, which there just wasn't many that were.
Yeah, I feel like I don't often like dip my toes into the more fintechy side of things, but that is like an interesting confluence you're dealing with. I guess to get into just maybe some of the nitty gritty of what you do, we talked a lot about payments, but with on ramping, off ramping specifically, maybe just like let's start with like just the basic user experience. So I'm a person who wants to, get some Solana to trade meme coins with. I have a few options. I can go through like Coinbase Wallet. I can go through like Stripe has some infrastructure here, Meso. All of them kind of have high fees, which like I think in my time using crypto, that's the biggest annoyance. Or like I only think about on ramping and off ramping to that extent where it's like, this sucks that I spent $25, but I got $23 worth of crypto. So
Yep.
can you just explain like where those fees come from and what the challenge is with trying to bring them down, which I'm assuming you're trying to do?
Oh yeah. I'd say like the fees are like there's a few aspects of it. Probably like the biggest driver by far is fraud. Like the on ramping specifically is like one of the only examples of a time where like you have to make a fraud decision and you basically have one chance. Like in like Venmo, when people are bringing money into Venmo, we of course like we scrutinize that and like we're trying to detect fraud at that stage. But even if we let fraudulent money in, we have another chance to stop it when it's trying to get pulled out of Venmo. So we have like a few different like safety nets we can rely on. With on ramps, you don't have that. It's like you're making that decision. If you got it wrong, the money's gone and you're holding the bag. So I think that's what makes fraud so challenging. And I also think fraud, going back to my earlier point of like money transmission is not something that many teams do. Is it also because like fraud is this unsolved problem? Like this was a massive problem for us with Venmo. And I think this was in like 2018. Like we did a deep dive into being like, okay, like what other infrastructure is out there? Like there has to be like, fraud services and things like that could help us. And it's just like, there just wasn't. Like there wasn't stuff out there. And like we had to end up building a lot of it ourselves. And we're seeing the beginning of like much better fraud infrastructure. Like Sardine is a company that we use and we know a lot of other on ramps use. They're definitely way better, but the problem is still very much unsolved. And like I think what's very frustrating about the fraud problem is like one, it causes the fees to be artificially high, but it also means like the user experience is just like very inconsistent. Like the other pain point we hear from a lot of people is like I just can't get an on ramp to work. Like I just get declined. And a lot of that is because you're like, if you have this big fraud problem, you're incentivized to like tune your fraud rules to be incredibly sensitive, which means you're catching a lot of good users and stopping them. So fraud is definitely one. I think the other one is the cost of moving money. So like if you're using a debit card, the on ramp is going to pay somewhere between like 0.7% and 2% to do that, and then usually adding premiums on top of it because they're usually a smaller business compared to many others, and other factors. So like that matters, and that's also like that's a problem that like Venmo and others face. And the way they solved it is they diversify. Like they give users like other options besides paying with a card that are cheaper. That gets back to the problem of like there's just not a lot of like banking and payment partners that are willing to support crypto. So it means like we have very limited options of what other payment methods we can support. So we're all forced to basically purely rely on cards, which is again why you see a higher fee.
On the if I could just kind of on the fraud point, not to put you on the spot here, but I'm just curious if you have any like offhand data or just is there a way you can quantify how common fraud is? Like how many of the inbound on-ramp requests are fraudulent?
I would say we've gotten some data from some of our banking and payments partners that tell us that the average kind of fraud rate in crypto is about 5x higher than what we would see in TradFi.
Wow.
Which makes sense. It's like because it's the ultimately the lot of fraud you see is people trying to monetize like a stolen credential. Like they buy a CSV of stolen cards off the dark web and they're trying to like get money out of them and into their bank account. And like crypto is a really easy way to do that. Like P2P apps are as well, but P2P apps, like I said before, have those like multiple steps they can catch you. With crypto, you don't have those multiple steps. You of course have the other problem as a fraudster, which is like now it like you can't let those crypto funds get like blacklisted. But like that's I think an easier problem for a fraudster to navigate than like this institution still has my money.
Mm-hmm. That's yeah. It's sort of like you said earlier. Like the benefit of crypto is that it's instant, but there's also a flip side to that coin where it creates some problems as well. And yeah, a lot of risk to absorb, I guess, if you're trying to do business above board in crypto. Yeah, I guess we're running out of time here. There's like so much to cover. I guess one thing I'd also wanted to chat about with you, Ben, is we were texting before this, and you said something along the lines of like mainstream adoption is pretty much a meme. I'm curious what you meant by that, and just like how do you think about the goalposts maybe for mainstream adoption when it comes to something like payments?
Yeah, and I mean I think mainstream adoption as a meme, I think it's similar to your point earlier around like people are kind of like bored almost, and I think that I see that get thrown around a lot, and I also see it get thrown around a lot by like teams talking about like we're gonna onboard the next billion users, and it's like let's focus on onboarding like the next 10 users. Like let's start small and we'll get there eventually.
I like the you'll hear like onboard the next billion, but there's not a first billion. So you exactly. Like anyways.
Exactly. So I think that's really what I mean is I think there's almost now some amount of apathy of people being like, stop talking about this. Like we're not there yet. And like talking more about it isn't going to get us there. Like building is going to get us there, which I very much agree with. But I also like what I was mentioning to you on Telegram is like, while that is true, we should still be asking the question of like, what is really holding it back? Like what is stopping it? And that's where like my points I brought up a few times on regulation, I think is my current view is like, you know, regulation is a very hot topic, but I think what is very clear to me is like regulation is holding businesses back. It's like, I don't think it's necessarily directly holding consumers back, but because it's holding businesses back, it's also holding like businesses that have yet to be created back. And like, that's what we really like, what is really going to get us to mass adoption is more people building in crypto. And like, without more regulatory clarity, we're always going to be have a limited set of builders. But I also, the other reason I worry about it, like both this and the whole like crypto has a UX problem as kind of memes, is it's like it's turned into this fight in the industry of like people saying like, you know, oh no, we are ready for mass adoption, or no we're not, or like UX is not a blocker, or yes it is. And I just think it's like we're losing the actual like interesting debate and like discourse that goes into it. Like UX is something that I think is like massively misunderstood in crypto. It's like, I think a lot of people think of this as like a nice to have. It's like UX is like how you make the product like feel really easy and simple to start. And it's like UX is everything. Like when we think a lot about UX, like in the context of risk, it's like getting a risk decline is a terrible experience. And it's like, for our good users, how do we eliminate that terrible experience? Like that is good UX. Or like, adding one of the, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to like make our onboarding flow really simple and easy. But one of the things we did is we actually like added more interstitial steps that explain to people what's going on, because it's like, yeah, if you're going to type the last four of your SSN into a website, like you should understand why you're doing that. And so like sometimes the best UX is actually adding back friction. And so like all to say, it's like UX, I think for people who I think are truly like truly experienced and like really invested into UX, they think of it as a very holistic thing. It's like it's the experience of the user. It is not the look and feel. It's not like how easy is it to do things. It's like the overall experience. And I think that's the place where it's just like we have a huge problem here still. Like one of like my pet peeves is like I would love to get to a point where we could just say like, hey, it's USD. Like it's there's a stable coin backing it. You shouldn't have to care about which stable coin. It's like you have USD. But it's like we're very far from being able to do that right now. And again, this goes back to regulation. It's like we have to have disclosures. We have to be clear to the user what blockchain and what asset they're buying. And it's like all that leads to a worse experience. But on the flip side, I also think like being too eager to abstract things can really hurt users. And that's where like security and safety, I still think we're far away on. It's like, I think the wallet infrastructure we have today is a huge step in the right direction, but it's still like, I still don't think we have figured out like the right shape of how to give users custody of digital assets, but still give them the ability to like call someone if something goes wrong. It's like, and I think we can get there. This is why I get very excited about things like Fuse, which the Squads team has recently put out, or just like smart contract wallets in general.
It sounds like on that UX point, is what you're getting at. Like UX is not just a thing that you can add to your product, but like it is the product itself. Like there's no separating UX from the app that you have.
Yes, or like we spent a ton of time talking about UX at Braintree, and Braintree is an API. Like it's not a product. It's like the user is the developer, and the UX is the docs, is the error messages, is every aspect of it. So it's like every team, like what the UX is for every app is going to be different. But I think it's a huge mistake to not be thinking deeply about it.
So I guess maybe where we'll end off is we've talked about a lot of things that crypto needs to do. And I think you uniquely maybe see a lot of like how far crypto needs to come before it gains, more meaningful adoption. So I guess like if you just had to pick one, like there's one thing that crypto could fix and you had a magic wand and you were just going to make that fix right now to, that would unlock mass adoption for crypto. What's the thing you're waving your wand and doing?
That is a really good question. I don't know. Like this is not going to be a satisfying answer, but like I think I would wave my wand at would be like regulators to actually like enable crypto to like do the right thing. And like the thing, there a lot of that is like people are probably, when I say regulators and regulation, people probably have in their mind what I'm talking about. But like one of the places that I feel like people have almost like given up on is like privacy. Like this is like when I think about what do we have to do, it's like there's safety and there's privacy. And like safety, we talked a lot about. I think there's a lot of teams working on it. I think there's a lot more work to do, but I think we'll get there. Privacy feels like a little bit of like still very greenfield because it's so incompatible with the way regulators are looking at crypto right now. And like if I could wave a wand, it would be that. It would be like get regulators to really like. It feels like a lot of regulators right now are trying to be like, okay, we're going to let you do some things with crypto versus saying, actually, crypto is the right next step for us foundationally for the internet. And let's figure out how to like set it up to succeed. Because I think if you look at it that way, you don't look at the privacy as like, well, you have to conform to the way we're doing it. You look at it as like, how do we think about privacy in a post-blockchain world? And that, like, I think there's tons of teams. There's a tons of teams on Solana that I think are doing fantastic work when it comes to privacy, like on-chain privacy. But they're just basically hamstrung because regulator, like on ramps, it's like literally if you've interacted with anything that looks even remotely like a privacy protocol, like chain analysis, TRM, like all the blockchain security companies are going to flag you as high risk, no matter what. So it's just like you can't even touch this stuff without basically getting blacklisted from TradFi. It's like, it's bullshit. Like that has to change.
So a regulator wand. Who is building this?
Wand. Yeah. I would love a regulator wand if someone could build that for me.
Well, hey, that is all the time that we have for today, but it's been a really, really interesting episode. Ben, thank you so much for joining the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Talk soon.